have to have a good ending, a happy ending in America. Everything's got to be good. So we didn't want our children to face the anti-Semitism in America. So what we did was we changed our names when we came to America. But the shame in it, there was shame apparently. I wasn't aware of the shame, but apparently there was a lot of shame to it. And to cover the shame, Daryl Horn claims, we created a story, folklore. What's the folklore? That in Ellis Island, they changed our names for us. They saw a long name, Zukovsky, so they gave you the name of Zucker. How'd you get the name Zucker? Oh, my grandfather was Zukovsky, but they saw on his name, they couldn't write it, so they said Zucker, or whatever. You've heard these stories a million times. And she spends a full chapter debunking this completely, saying it's pure baloney, malarkey. It never happened. Why? Because the agents in Ellis Island never had the right to do that. They never even had a pen in their hand. They were just processing paper. And that kind of stuff had to happen before they got on the ship on the other end. And all these people did was walk up and hand in their papers. And so all these people that claimed that that was the case really changed their names in the court system in America because they were ashamed of who they were, and or they didn't want any anti-Semitic blowback on them for being Jewish. So the name Goldberg, oh, I'm going to change it to Gold, or Berg, or whatever, but not Goldberg. So, you know, I was upset when I read that. I said, maybe there's some truth to this. Maybe this happened. But what about Siegel? I'm a Siegel. That's Sgan Kohanim. That's a Hebrew name. My grandfather came to America in 1920. He didn't change his name. He was proud of his name. And then what about all these great people like Benjamin Cardozo, Louis Brandeis? I'm not going to tell you who they were because you know who they were. Felix Frankfurter, Arthur Goldberg, Abe Fortas, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Samuel Goldman, Al Kaufman, Marcus Lowe, Louis B. Mayer, all these people, none of them changed their names. They kept their Jewish names. So what is she talking about? And there is some truth. There is some truth to the fact that some Jews did change their names. But what she doesn't tell you here, because she's a good Jewish girl, she doesn't tell you that many of the Jews that on the ships, when they passed the Statue of Liberty, there was a tradition among some of them to cast their tefillin from their bags out into the ocean, as if it was a rite of passage, that they are free of this shackle that have kept their families shackled for generations in the shtetl. No more. They're done. That she doesn't tell you, because that would be counterintuitive to the story that she's trying to narrate for us simple, gullible Jews. So that is one part of the name changing, but the other part of it, and again, she never considers Israel in any of her discussion. Israel never comes up. And so I said, what about all the name changes in Israel? What about these people? All these great Golda Meir. Zev Lieber, my wife's father, changed his name. What they called it, Hebraicized them. They wanted a new life in Israel. It wasn't because they were afraid of anti-Semitism in Israel that they were changing their names. And I did a quick list of some of these names. Zalman Shazar, again, I'm not going to tell you who these people were. You know who they were. Zalman Shazar, his name was Rubashov. Shimon Peres, his name was Persky. Golda Meir, Meyerson. And on and on. It just never ends. This is the list. I mean, all these names you hear about today, I mean, you know, these are not their real names. But they wanted to be something else. They wanted to be Israeli. And this was the way, this was the first step in changing their name, it was modifying their identity in some manner or form. And that's what happened with the American Jews. They weren't, this narrative that she's giving of anti-Semitism, I mean, I don't remember, and maybe it happened, that some Gentile was chasing a Jew down the street with a knife. A Jew, I'm going to kill him. I don't think it happened that way. There may have been some intimidation. There may have been. But I don't think to the point where American Jews had to change their name for that reason. I think they changed it because they wanted to be American. And the way to be American is to shed your tefillin, on the one hand symbolically, but really to shed your name and to become as more American than the Americans. And that in many ways really helped us. It advanced us. I mean, within a generation, I don't have to tell you, within a generation, how many the great Jewish mothers we talk about, what does that mean? They pushed their boys to school, become good Americans, get good grades, excel. Within a generation, they were doctors, lawyers, businessmen, champions, shakers, movers, kings of industry, really. Within a generation. How does that happen? Because of the anti-Semitism here? So this is a Dara Horn narrative, which she's reading into it, and I find a little bit, she's gaslighting me. And the last part of it is, I never thought it would happen, but it did. She forgot about Israel completely. The word never comes up in the book. But, my friends, she forgot about our Sephardi cousins. Not one word about the Sephardi community. She's so worried about Ashkenazi Yiddish culture. We're forgetting Yiddish culture. What happened to the rich Sephardi culture? Why she never mentions it? That's the real gaslighting of this book. If any gaslighting took place, she gaslit all the Jews that are reading this book now. No Sephardi's ever mentioned in the book. Not Sephardi culture, not Spain, not the Inquisition, not Moroccan Jews, not Tunisian Jews, not the immigrations in 1950, 1952 from Arab countries to Israel and the struggles that they had and the problems that they had maintaining their own culture. None of this was ever mentioned by Dara Horn in this book. A gaping problem in her read. And so at the very end, I want to keep this, and by the way, you could challenge me anytime. I forgot to mention that. Challenge me, because I'm used to it being challenged day and night.
What about her last name? What was the original name?
Of who? Horn?
Horn. Yeah.
Good question. Yeah, that's a great question. Probably Hornovitz. Who knows? I don't know. But it's and she does something that's kind of revealing, because as you can imagine, I have you can probably get a feeling, I have a sort of like a funny feeling about Jewish people who discover their Jewish roots.
Yeah. John Kenny.
She says that she was so disconcerted writing this book. I mean, the problems, her son having to read about, Shylock, and the conversation she had with her son trying to explain Shakespeare's, I mean, she had such a horrible headache. She couldn't find any repose from any of this other than starting Daf Yomi. For those of you who don't know what Daf Yomi is, Daf Yomi is, it's a calendar system in a way where everyone in the world 7 days a week reads the same page of Talmud. And in a 7-year cycle, you finish the entire Talmud. So, the guy who started the system, his name was Rabbi Shapiro, who happened to have been a member of Agudat Yisrael, Agudas Yisrael, in the Ashkenazi way of pronouncing it, in Galicia, in 1923. He set up the system. He thought it would be something nice to do, but he had an agenda behind it. And his agenda item was that we got to find a way of combating the Zionists, the Tzionim, the Tzionim. They used to call them Tzionim because that was the Ashkenazi pronunciation. That they are bleeding us. They're leaving. They're going to Palestine, and they're becoming fried. They're becoming free. They're becoming non-religious. Our kids, not Yenim's, our kids. So we have to keep them. We have to keep them roped in. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to give them something challenging. We're going to give them Daf Yomi every day, no matter what you're doing around the world. Open up your Gemara. And everyone's on the same page. And this is a way of educating our youth and making them stronger people, Jewishly. So she was Horn. Thought that she would claim, and I'm almost quoting, claim clarity through it, meaning through Daf Yomi, by being able to see clearly through the fog of life. What she doesn't note is that the Zionists, our forefathers, the Zionists said just the opposite. That they consider Talmud an impediment to modern Jewish life because of its, and I quote, circuitous logic and frustrating the student. So they saw just the opposite. Daf Yomi was the wrong way to go. And yet, they built the state of Israel. Dara Horn studies Daf Yomi to find some clarity of thought, and she's living in Millburn, New Jersey. That's where she lives. That is the difference between the two narratives. So, this is the book. I encourage you to read it because it gets you to think. And you don't want to read something to which you agree with, because if you do, then why read it? What are you learning from it? It's refreshing because she is a Jew of a lot of Jewish knowledge, a lot of information, and she writes beautifully. She writes a wonderful page, and she writes wonderful novels. I would encourage you to read her novels. And I even, a couple of them I read, In the Image and All Other Nights are the two that I read, and they're very good. And she writes a great story. This book is, as I said, it leaves a lot to be desired for me, but you may find it completely refreshing. So I recommend it. Thank you.
Thank you.